Hoka has released a ton of shoes in 2024, and most of them look, as you would expect, like a Hoka. But where does the new Hoka Skyflow fit within the rotation of the Cliftons, Bondis, and Rincons? Let's break down the Hoka Skyflow. What's up everyone, I'm Eric McIntyre, aka Rad Dad Bod, and you're watching Rad Dad Bod TV, where we review running shoes. Today we're going to be breaking down the Hoka Skyflow, and if this is your first time here, you may notice that there's some timestamps in the description below. Feel free to jump around throughout the review to the various breakdown and aspects of the shoe to find what you're looking for, but if you do, I sure hope you come back and watch the full video when you get a chance, because I do my best to make these as educational and comprehensive as possible so you can make the right decision for you. Now, if you've been someone who watches my videos for a while, I would sure appreciate it if you made sure to click that subscribe button if you haven't already. And if you're feeling up for it, leave a comment for me below, even if it's a kind message or maybe a question about the shoe. I sure appreciate any engagement that you guys decide to leave. Now, with that out of the way, let's talk about some disclaimers and disclosures around the Hoka Skyflow. I was given this shoe for free actually through an unboxing campaign. You can actually see the Skyflow box back here, and I was not asked to make any particular videos or share any particular assets, just that if I liked the shoe or if I wanted to share an unboxing on my story or anything like that, that they would be very happy if I did that. Of course, I did make that video, but again, I was not asked to make any additional content or videos. But I wanted to review the shoes, as that's what I do, and so I'm doing a full review, obviously. But no one from Hoka or any brand or any association whatsoever gets to watch these videos beforehand. All thoughts are entirely my own. Now, with that out of the way, let's talk about the intended use of the shoe. The Skyflow is a max cushion daily trainer similar to the Hoka Bondi and the Hoka Clifton, which can get a little bit confusing for some, and we'll talk about that today. The purpose of this shoe is primarily kind of those daily miles, easy runs, long runs, just a little bit of everything. It's meant to be a fairly versatile shoe. As such, that's how we're going to be evaluating this shoe throughout this review. From a price perspective, this shoe comes in at $160, which is pretty typical for a max cushion daily trainer. Really, like if you think of shoes like the Asics Gel Nimbus, same overall price point. I think the Saucony Triumph comes in around the same as well. So right around market rate, we might call it. Now, talking about some specs, this shoe comes in just around 10 ounces, which is, again, on the heavier side, but not uncommon for a max cushion daily trainer. In fact, it maybe is even a little bit lighter than some max cushion daily trainers out there as well. The heel comes in at 39 millimeters, with the forefoot coming in at 34 millimeters for a 5 millimeter heel to toe drop, which is pretty typical for a Hoka. Moving on to the fit, this shoe has a fairly standard fit. I do think lengthwise it fits true to size, so if you wear a 10.5, continue to wear your standard 10.5. And I would say that this shoe also fits a little bit more accommodating in the midfoot in particular than some other Hoka models. Thinking particularly about the Clifton, while the Clifton 9 does seem to be a little bit wider than previous models, it still has a fairly pronounced arch. Or if you're used to the Hoka Skyflow, same thing, a fairly pronounced arch. I did find that the Skyflow, while still maintaining that arch, I don't feel like it was quite as pronounced as some of those other shoes, which means that the midfoot may fit a little bit better for some people. All that being said, it is still a Hoka and fits like a Hoka, so I would say overall standard fit, not narrow, not wide throughout. Moving to the upper, you have this Creel Jacquard upper, which is pretty typical for most Hoka models nowadays. It is a somewhat breathable material, but there is some good cushioning inside the shoe as well as with the tongue. And so while you do get some breathability kind of there in the midfoot area, a little bit in the toe box, I would say that this shoe doesn't necessarily run breathable, but it also is not going to cook your feet entirely like some other max cushion shoes. I feel like the shoe maintains some really, really good midfoot lockdown, and at no point did I feel like I was sliding around in the shoe. The heel cup is nice, and there's some nice cushion here around the ankle and Achilles area, which is going to keep you comfortable, reduce hot spots, and just keep you overall locked in. I feel like for a max cushion shoe, I don't find the upper to be overwhelming. I'm not a huge fan of the super plush, like overly cushioned, comfortable uppers. And so I do feel like this shoe strikes a decent balance for a max cushion shoe of giving you kind of a good structured upper with comfortable elements without being overwhelming. The other thing I like, which does aid the lockdown, is that the tongue is fully gusseted with kind of those elastic bands on the side. So again, it's one of the reasons why you get such good support there in the midfoot, and it's going to reduce any slippage within the upper. Now, talking about the midsole, this is probably one of the more interesting points about this shoe. The midsole uses a SCF EVA, which I believe is a supercritical EVA foam, and it's a little bit lighter and bouncier than what is used in both the Bondi and the Clifton. And that sensation is absolutely true on foot. So in terms of weight, this shoe fits between the Bondi and Clifton. In terms of cost, this shoe fits between the Bondi and Clifton. In terms of stack height, this shoe fits between the Bondi and Clifton. However, in terms of foam, this shoe feels drastically different from the two of those. I find the Clifton in particular to be supportive, but not necessarily super squishy. And I know a lot of people like the Bondi. I'm not a huge Bondi runner, so I can't speak too much to the specifications of how that shoe feels underfoot, but comparing to the Clifton, this is a softer, squishier, and more responsive foam than the Hoka Clifton. As such, I do think that this shoe is going to be a little bit more responsive, and so maybe you can take the paces up a little bit more with this shoe. But for me, I find with this kind of stack and this kind of squish, while yes, for maybe pickups at the end of an easy run, it feels a little bit more versatile, when you actually get it out into like a full-on speed session or interval session, your foot is sinking into the foam a lot and you're bouncing off the ground, but it's taking a lot of force and a lot of effort to kind of get that speed. So I do think that this shoe is great for kind of your standard daily runs, maybe some of those baseline runs, easy runs, or like lower end moderate runs. I don't think this shoe is very comfortable or great for actual faster paces and workouts. In fact, if I were going to choose between the Skyflow and the Clifton for those types of runs in particular, I would choose the Clifton because ironically, it's not a shoe that you would associate with ground feel, but it does feel a little bit firmer underfoot. And for me, I like that when trying to get my turnover kind of going and have those faster overall paces. So this midsole, while nice, is very plush, a lot softer and squishier than the Clifton, more responsive than the Clifton, yet is going to be a little bit more of that relaxed overall ride and take a little bit of the stress off of your legs on some of those nice recovery, easy, and just kind of standard daily runs. Because of the width of the shoe, I do feel like it is fairly stable. I don't feel like you're going to feel like you're rolling over at all. That being said, it's not a stability shoe, and so if you do overpronate to a large extent, you may want to consider something closer to like the Gaviota instead of the Skyflow, which is also going to have a little bit bouncier foam nowadays than maybe the last year's Clifton. But again, I do feel like for a max cushion shoe, daily trainer, you do have that wider base, you do have that high stack, but you kind of have an asymmetrical geometry in the midsole, which does lend to a little bit more stability. In fact, the tooling or the setup of this shoe is supposed to be similar to the Skyward X, which personally, I get where that's coming from in terms of like fit and profile, but I found this shoe to be a lot softer, a lot squishier, a lot more comfortable than the Skyward X. And stability-wise, they're probably pretty similar, but ironically, the Skyward X might be a little bit more stable due to the H-shaped carbon fiber plate. Moving to the outsole of the shoe, the Skyflow has a high durabrasion rubber throughout the shoe with some strategic cutouts to cut out some weight and actually add some stability with that kind of channel down the middle of the shoe. I really like Hoka's durabrasion rubber. I think it does really, really well on slick surfaces. So these shoes should do great throughout all different types of weather. You're not going to be slipping, sliding around, and if you are, then honestly, you're probably in weather that's going to require actual lugs or terrain that requires actual trail shoes. But if you're running on the roads or kind of dirt or gravel roads, this should do the job for you, and you can even run on slightly wet or slick surfaces and don't have to worry too much, as these shoes tend to grip fairly well. The high durabrasion rubber also is fairly durable, and so we're closing in on about 50 miles in these shoes, and I'm not seeing any really like signs of high wear and tear, neither on the foam or the outsole itself. And so what that tells me is they place that outsole very strategically, which is going to give you the coverage in the areas that you need in those high contact points, and that rubber again is going to last quite a bit. I'm not sure honestly how durable these are going to be compared to the Cliftons. I know a lot of people have durability concerns with Hokas. They feel like the foams bottom out through like 200 miles, and I will say that yeah, 200 miles seems to be around where I feel like I lose some of the bounce or some of the support in previous Hoka models. I'm not sure with this new midsole compound or new midsole tooling how that's going to hold up, but if I'm being honest, I would say most running shoes nowadays, if you're running in them a lot, you're probably going to get kind of in that 200 to 300 mile range. Doesn't mean you can't take the shoe beyond that, but that's going to be the majority of kind of their support and cushion that you feel underfoot. As far as who's this shoe for, Hoka themselves created the shoe to somewhat take some pressure off of the Hoka Clifton and the Hoka Bondi. Now, from an aesthetic standpoint, you can see that it is a little bit sportier, while the Bondi and the Clifton have gone a little bit more lifestyle in their design, because so many people are wearing them casually, wearing them to work, wearing them to the office and whatnot. The Skyflow is supposed to be kind of the runner's Clifton, which the Clifton is a phenomenal shoe. It was one of my very first running shoes that I had, and I still love that shoe, and I'm excited to see the next iteration. But I would say that this is more of your kind of new age max cushion daily trainer in terms of how that foam feels underfoot. A lot of other brands are letting that foam trickle down, and so if you are someone who likes bounce, right, who likes to feel kind of a cushiony bounce underfoot when you're running, and you don't like kind of more of the high cushion but high support type shoe, you know, where you want to feel that foam really compress underfoot, then this is going to be an excellent option for you. I also think that this is going to be a good shoe to wear to work or the office if you're on your feet for long periods of time. And I think if you can't get a Clifton or a Bondi, then the Skyflow is going to work just as good, if not better, underfoot for that use case. From a runner's perspective, if you want to have a shoe that maybe is a little bit more versatile as a max cushion daily trainer, like I said, I don't think that this shoe is fit necessarily for intervals, but you could take it on a kind of threshold session and probably do just fine. Like, it is going to be a little bit more versatile than the Clifton for most people, but again, that comes down to preference and the kind of sensations you like underfoot. The midsole itself feels similar to the Mach 6, but a little bit, or not even a little bit, a lot wider and obviously higher stack overall. So if you liked the Mach 6 but wanted a more traditional Hoka feeling upper and more underfoot, then this is kind of a max cushion Mach 6 in terms of sensation underfoot. I still think that people who need stability shoes are going to lean more towards the Gaviota. This is a fairly stable max cushion daily trainer, but with more squish comes less stability. So that is something to keep in mind as you are shopping for shoes. If it feels good in store, but you're used to wearing more stability shoes, you may find that as the runs get longer, the more tired your ankles and feet become, and you may be wishing that you had a little bit more of that lateral or medial support. Now, from a comparison standpoint, within the Hoka lines, you have the Hoka Clifton, you have the Hoka Bondi. The Skyflow does sit comfortably between the two in weight, in stack, in overall price. But I feel like the Skyflow is a more responsive version of those two shoes and is a squishier version of those two shoes. I've spoken to some running retailers about this shoe and how they're positioning it and how they feel about it, and a lot of them have said they feel like this shoe kind of makes those other two somewhat obsolete, at least for specifically runners. If they're not looking for the shoe for more casual use, then from a running perspective, this shoe is just kind of an upgraded version of those two in terms of responsiveness, which in that sense I do agree, but I still think there is a place for the Clifton Bondi if you like more of a supportive sensation as opposed to a squishy sensation. This shoe is very similar in my mind to the Saucony Triumph 22 that just released this year. Both in overall weight and comfort of the shoe. The difference would be that the Saucony Triumph 22 is going to be a 10 millimeter drop, while this is a 5 millimeter drop. So if you're not used to that higher drop, then you may prefer the Skyflow. But the sensation underfoot is very, very similar. In the Saucony Triumph 22, you have Power Run PB, which is a supercritical bouncy foam, though it is tuned, in my opinion, to be a little bit less responsive, a little bit more stable. Very, very similar to the SCF EVA that is used in the Skyflow. I'll also be very curious to see how this compares to the New Balance 1080 V14. I think that the V13 is even squishier than the Skyflow, but the way that the Fresh Foam X underneath in the 1080 V13 compresses and rebounds when doing pickups, in my opinion, feels similar to the Skyflow. And then comparing to another max shoe, the Asics Gel Nimbus 26, I think is a lot firmer and more supportive, more in the vein of a Hoka Clifton, as opposed to the bounciness of a Hoka Skyflow. Now, one shoe that I am very curious to compare this against is the Brooks Ghost Max 2. I have not put any miles on this shoe. It is next on my list of Max Cushion daily trainers to try, but I have heard that the DNA Loft nitrogen infused in the Max 2 is a little bit softer than in the Max 1, where the Max 1 I felt like was a little bit firmer and reminded me a little bit of a plateless Skyward X. So I'll be curious to see how the Ghost Max 2 fares in comparison, but these would probably be competitors in the running space, and so I'll have an update when I do release the review of the Ghost Max 2. I'll do a comparison to the Skyflow and you can see kind of how they stack up overall. Now, final thoughts on the Hoka Skyflow. Overall, I do see what Hoka is doing. I think that the market is leaning more towards softer, squishier, more responsive foams for your daily trainers and for your Max Cushion trainers. I think that Max Cushion for a long time just meant more stack and more stability, and it was more just protection for people who wanted more underfoot, so there's less wear and tear. But over time, it's evolved to everyone wanting a little bit more bounce and a little bit more assistance in all the geometries and the foams that are underfoot. So I believe most Max Cushion daily trainers are going to continue to feel this way. I wouldn't be surprised if the Gel Nimbus 27 was more squishy, if the 1080 V14 feels very similar, if the Saucony Triumph 23 continues down this line of a more squishy, softer foam underfoot. So I don't think that this is going away. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, though I do wonder what the update to the Clifton 10 is going to be in comparison, because personally I do prefer something that is not necessarily firm, but a little bit less squishy when it comes to my Max Cushion daily trainers, and I just prefer maybe less of the Max Cushion feel overall. So I may not be the target audience overall. So with that, we'll wrap up our review. That was the Hoka Skyflow. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments. I'll be sure to answer. And if you haven't already, please go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button. It sure helps out as I continue to try and grow this channel and be able to get more shoes to review for each and every one of you. And as always, with that, we'll leave you with the question: if you have tried the Skyflow and you've been a Hoka loyalist or Hoka fan for a long time, which do you prefer? The newly updated Skyflow or the more traditional Bondi and Clifton? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks, everybody.